Hi, welcome back to Sense of Life. This is episode 5 of the podcast. We are talking about Audition. Audition is a 1997 novel by Ryu Murakami and also the 1999 film adaptation by legendary cult filmmaker Takashi Miike, who we talked about on the Harakiri episode.
Yep.
Um, we've seen this movie a couple times, but we just read the book first, and I think we'll probably start with the book, or do we want to start with the movie? How do you want to do this?
Um, is it going to be that structured, or is it just going to kind of be like a interplay between the
Um,
two?
probably be a little interplay between the two, but
Yeah. Um, I suppose we could start with the book.
yeah.
If we want to.
So I guess what were your general impressions about the book?
Well, I think we watched the movie. Immediately talking about the movie, we watched the movie a while ago. This was like
Yes,
over a
yeah,
year ago at this point. So
yeah, I think so.
certain details had faded, but there are certain details of the story that really couldn't fade because they're really fucked up.
Right, yeah,
So, reading the book, it was really refreshing, and I found I actually liked the book more than the movie, which was kind of a surprise.
yeah.
Um,
I felt the same way. I thought that was I had heard people talk about Mike's movie over the book. A friend of mine, she had said that I guess something about the ending changed, and I think that's true. I don't know if it's all that like all that different. I don't know if
no,
the general concept is different.
yeah, it
Like
wasn't particularly different from how the book ended, but I
yeah,
suppose it goes without saying that we will be discussing the plot of these things. So if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, or if you've just seen one or the other, then you're going to be hearing about some differences.
yeah.
Uh, the
If you care about that, if you
if you
don't,
care about that, yeah. The the book does a lot better of a job, with the characterization.
yeah,
Obviously, just because you're getting it from the perspective of the main character, you're hearing his inner thoughts and his frustrations and so on.
right.
Um, and that doesn't always work out for the best, but in this case, it definitely did. I felt a lot more attached to the characters in the book. You genuinely feel like the main character Aoyama and his son Shige. You really get a sense of him being a really good dad, and the relationship between him and his son is really well written in the book. It was actually one of the highlights of it for me.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the things I noticed is with the book that you don't really get in the movie is because you have that like connection to even the helpful like friend producer
Yeah,
character, like you know like what they're doing is like really shady and not great, but like you don't get the kind of pure sleaze vibe you get from the Miike film.
yeah. I suppose
they
just
they
to
don't feel as honest, as dishonest as they do in the movie, I suppose.
yeah, there's a it is definitely, that's a good word for it, sleaze. There's a bit more sleaziness to it in the movie.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of just give a brief explanation of the premise of the movie and the book. Uh, Basically, the main character Aoyama is a dad, and his wife she dies of cancer, and he raises their son on his own. And the kind of catch of the story is that he wants to meet a woman and get married again, because it's been like 7 years since his wife died, and um, in order to actually do this, him and his friend who work for like a production company, they set up an audition for a movie, and they're like looking for a woman to play this part in the film, and they kind of just go through. He kind of goes through all of the resumes and just picks out. There's a lady that applied, and he really liked her essay she wrote, and he kind of becomes like infatuated with her, and kind of loses his perspective on how fucking crazy this lady seems to everyone else, but he doesn't
Yeah.
see it. Um, and yeah, that's basically the premise of the film and the book.
Yeah, it's got this kind of like noirish erotic thriller type premise.
Yeah,
Um, and um, it with the book you kind of feel more of like the how the narration happens is you get more of I fuck, how do you pronounce his name?
Aoyama.
Aoyama.
Yeah,
Get more of his kind of romantic side. You specifically notice this in like the sex scene of how it's written. Like you can tell that Murakami is the type of writer that would want to write it more pornographically.
yeah,
And in some ways he does, but he kind of tempers it for this character because the character is, even though what he's doing is sleazy and shady, his personality is more of like this like pure romantic. It's kind of similar to this book I was in a different way. This book I was reading before this, The Follower by Jason Starr, which I finally finished because I've been a slow reader. But the not really protagonist, but I guess the antagonist really is this kind of hopeless romantic that's also a killer, and and all of his narration is about like how much of a romantic he is, but he's just the kind of folly of him is that he doesn't really understand human beings and whatever. But that's a fundamentally different story and book. Yeah, what was it? I thought it was interesting. A lot of the kind of, I guess, what you would call social commentary that Murakami like kind of weaves in the novel. He talks a lot about like the changing culture in Japan. He talks about how like, oh, the kids these days and shit. It's
the timeless social commentary of the kids these
yeah,
days.
and specifically on I have a couple quotes written down that I'll bring up periodically, but one of them he says maybe having an ulterior motive is the way to go if you want to get a film made. And I think this was either Aoyama or his friend that says this, or he's thinking it. And the this is kind of interesting because Murakami is kind of a quote unquote failed filmmaker, um, and he's kind of like a Renaissance man, as it says in like the author notes in the book. He's done like experimental music and art films that didn't really do much, and then he started writing. So he's probably talking a lot about his experience in the industry and just like how auditions themselves can seem kind of phony. I know I've heard Brett Easton Ellis talk about it on his podcast when he was casting this web series he did. Like he would have an actor come in that would be like a fantastic actor and just do the part really well, but he does not look like the character should look, and therefore his audition is basically pointless.
Right.
And you have like an actor walk in, and then before they even say anything, you know that's who you need. And it's kind of just about that whole kind of ultimately what feels kind of fraudulent about the auditioning process, which I think is what he's kind of trying to say with the novel in general.
Yeah, yeah. I can definitely see what you mean by that.
Yeah,
The entire premise of the audition is fundamentally, he's looking for this particular woman. He's obsessed with her and her picture before he's even spoken to anyone else for the audition for
yeah,
this fake movie that they're making. Or it's not even necessarily that it's a fake movie. It's a movie that is very likely just going to not ever get made. So they just kind of use the audition as like a way to find this guy a wife. uh,
which is pretty much the case with most movies, because most movies don't get made. And
Yeah.
so in a way, it's kind of the perfect fraud in general, because
Yeah.
it's not. My favorite part about this, I was talking about this with someone else, is his kind of like prose style, the way he kind of puts sentences together. He has this like pop art sensibility that like is common in like Bret Easton Ellis and other people. Like you find it a lot in genre fiction, like Stephen King and like Jason Starr, who's crime writers and shit. That even if like um, they move like their page turners basically, but without being just like cheap. So it's using the mode of like your dime paperback or your airport thriller or whatever, but telling like a, I guess, deeper story if you want to go that route, which I like.
Yeah, I mean that kind of relies on the Ralph McCarthy translation of it being, pretty faithful to how Murakami wrote it, which, one can only assume, that it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Uh but yeah,
But I think the Japanese perspective on him is largely the same, because he had pretty decent success early on. He wrote a book when he was in college. I think it was his first book, that something Tempest Blue or whatever, and it got like a lot of awards. I think this one won a few Japanese awards. He's
Almost Transparent Blue.
Almost Transparent Blue. That's it.
Yeah.
Um, so he's a fairly like commercial author in Japan, as I understand. So he's got the cred for it as well.
Yeah.
What else? I guess going back to the romance angle, I wrote down this. I have my next two quotes are pretty long, so bear with me here. But I liked the way this was put together, how it kind of puts into words the emotion of the kind of erotic thriller, having like fucking a BPD art hoe and it destroying your life, but turning it into like a genuine emotion. This is on page 131 into 132. He still hadn't recovered from that kiss. Yamasaki Asami's lips were cold and sweet, and the moment the kiss was over, he'd experienced, along with exhilaration, a bizarre sense of guilt or shame. It wasn't quite like anything he'd ever known before, a sense of having done something that can never be retracted or forgiven. It was a bitter, almost painful sort of feeling, but it was also intoxicating. Just to taste those lips again, Ayama thought, I'd probably give up everything I own. And it says I'd probably give up everything I own in like italics on the next line.
Yeah.
It's very kind of simple, direct language. That's kind of like, that was the first thing I read that I was like, oh fuck, man, shit.
Yeah, it kind of just reiterates that he's like a pretty decent guy, and
Yeah.
his motive is he's trying to find a woman to spend the rest of his life with, because of the fact that his original wife had died, and it took him years to kind of recover from that. But at the same time, he feels guilt, and I don't know if it's just subconsciously because he's doing a shitty thing to acquire the
Yeah.
what's her name?
Asami.
Yeah, Yamasaki Asami. Yeah.
Yeah. Who he, in every time he mentions her in the book, he always says Yamasaki Asami. He always calls her by her full name, which I thought was interesting. About the movie, kind of, I guess we kind of jump back and forth in between here.
Sure.
What did you think about how like what I noticed on this last watch of the movie is just how kind of almost choppy it feels, where the book feels kind of streamlined and it's going through, the story and the emotions of the characters, but it kind of feels like it's jumping around a lot, especially in that last section where it's like we jump to like a bunch of different dream sequences within dream sequences. And
Yeah. I
the
definitely agree
first time I watched the movie, I liked it. This second time, it feels a little underwhelming, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the way that the book does it is, it's very straightforward. It's chronological. This happens and then it leads to this and so on, and you're kind of just experiencing his infatuation with this lady.
Yeah.
And the movie kind of, it starts off fairly similar,
Yeah.
and then about halfway through the movie, um it gets to the point where in the book there's like 2 chapters left.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, there's still half a movie left. And
Yeah.
it kind of does these dream sequences where I don't know if it's actually supposed to be like he's dreaming these, or it's almost like mystical revelations, because the things that he sees in these dream sequences are true. They did happen.
Yeah. And one of these does happen in the book, but it's just one.
Yeah.
It's basically like Asami's backstory. He gets in this like premonition dream.
Yes. I found it was very choppy, and I think it has to do with the fact that the novel kind of drops hints as to how fucked up the lady is, with everyone's dialogue, where they're kind of just like, there's something about her, I don't like her, or his friend is just like, there's something wrong with this woman. She just doesn't seem right. And they'll even have the narration will kind of say something along the lines of like, if he had noticed this at this time and so on, like it's dropping these sort of hints that something is wrong, but the movie doesn't do that. Except for
I think it does it once.
It does have the friend tell him, this lady is
at the audition.
There's something wrong with her, but the movie does a lot of this stuff through these sort of dream sequences or revelations, and it is a little distracting because you're kind of getting the twist of the book has a lot more impact, just because you're like, oh, holy shit, that's fucking crazy. But then the twist of the movie takes up like the last 45 minutes, I would say. It's kind of
a like the longest third act of any movie.
Right, because the final act of the movie kind of starts with him taking a drink from this bottle of alcohol that they've shown in his house a few times. And it turns out Asami snuck into his house and like drugged this bottle, and he takes a drink from the bottle, and then he starts to feel pretty woozy, and then you get all these flashbacks and dream sequences in after that, and then we cut back and forth between that and like the current event, and then there's like another dream fake out right before the actual end of the movie. And it's like, god damn, dude, that's
but and by that last one, you're just like, all right, can we just fucking end this movie and let's go?
I mean, I didn't hate it. It's just after having just read the book, it's missing the sort of characterization that they had in the book, and the kind of straightforward narrative that the book had as well, with its presentation of what happens. So it just kind of
specifically with Asami breaking in. This is like kind of goes into the last quote that I wrote down but there's this point in the novel where it describes it does this really cool thing with switching perspectives from Oyama, and Asami, and it's got this like classic like third person limited point of view. So The narrator is just kind of omnisciently going between the characters, but also taking on their emotions in this kind of weird objective subjective way. But in the movie, the way it switches to Asame's perspective is through these like weird dream sequences, premonitions, and it's kind of oblique. She doesn't really feel like a person in a way, and sometimes that can work. I don't know if it works here, but anyway, there's this really cool kind of prose thing in here that happens. I'll go ahead and read. This is going to be kind of a long one again, but start with his first reaction. Okay. His first reaction on realizing that she was going to murder him was not, strangely enough, terror, but the sort of feeling of closure one has finally solving a puzzle. It hasn't just been a misunderstanding after all. It was about Shige. She hadn't been able to accept or forgive the fact that Aoyama had a son whom he adored. Nor had Yamasaki Asami ever overcome, as Aoyama had believed, the trauma of being raised by a stepfather who beat and abused and reviled her. She still carried that trauma, still lived with it every day. Any man who betrayed or lied to her was the same as her stepfather. Therefore, according to her reasoning, such men should have their feet severed to resemble him more closely. When not working at the part-time job that covered living expenses, she spent all her time preparing for the next operation. She would become intimate with a man and simply begin forging a plan to cut off his feet should he prove to be just like her stepfather. In her teens, she'd only dream up the plans and never carried them out. She didn't have a proper tool for one thing. It was while watching a cooking show on TV that she discovered the wire saw, a thin steel cable with teeth and a ring attached to either end. The TV chef had used it to cut effortlessly through a ham on the bone, saying that there was simply no other tool to match it for this sort of task. The wire saw had made everything possible. She read up on pharmaceuticals as well, and found a way to get her hands on whatever drug she needed. Thorazine, benzodiazepines, meprobamate, Valium, Medazepam, Librium, nitrous oxide, mucimol, amphetamines, psilocin, LSD. She had cased Aoyama's home a number of times and even broken in before. At about halfway through that second paragraph, it switches to her perspective, but through that like third person omniscient, and it kind of changes from like Aoyama's romantic kind of sensibility to Asame's crazy, thoughtful psychopath sensibility. Yeah, I read this passage and I thought that was like, oh wow, that was really cool.
It is a pretty cool sequence within the book, because it starts off, he's it's as if he understands now what is going on, and then it pretty effortlessly switches to her perspective of, her cold clinical approach to kind of rationalizing, why she needs to fucking cut this guy's feet off.
It goes from like just like a normal guy to like Patrick Bateman talking in like a second.
Yeah.
Just like within a sentence. It's some really oddly like very clear and effective like writing shit happening in this book for like basically what amounts to like a one-day read thriller.
Yeah, it is a very short book. It's only like 200 pages.
And the movie feels really long. Man.
That is another point too. The movie is it feels long compared to how much of a breeze the book is to go through.
I think I'm starting to hate Audition, the Miike movie.
I don't know if I would go that far. I
don't think I hate it, but
I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. But once you've read the book and you see, this is kind of the material being adapted here, there is very much a different approach to it that Miike is taking than what the intent was originally.
Yeah, I think Murakami likes the movie, but I think he thinks it's like fine and it's okay.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's one interview I found of him. I meant to watch it for this, but I didn't get a chance to. It's like 50 minutes long on YouTube. I think it was in like the special features or some shit for Audition at some point. What else? I think I almost like the kind of American film movement that Audition kind of inspired more than Audition at this point. We were just talking about this before we started recording, the torture porn kind of movies like Hostel and Saw.
Yeah. It I actually haven't seen Hostel. I think we talked about you mentioned Hostel in one of the other episodes, and I said the same thing then, that I have not seen it.
Yeah, it's like Saw. I mean, it's a similar concept.
Right.
Miike, of course, has a kind of an uncredited cameo, which is pretty funny. It's got a similar kind of structure where the first half is kind of a comedy.
Yes.
And the second half, around I think the 40-minute mark in Hostel, the violence starts, and then it just gets worse.
Yeah, the movie does have a bit of a comedic angle to it, while the book does play those same sequences pretty straight. Like the actual audition itself, you see the Aoyama and his friend. I think his friend's name is Yoshikawa. They're interviewing ladies at this audition, and in the book and in the movie they ask some pretty similar questions, like would you work in the adult entertainment industry and stuff like that. They're just kind of asking them random
rapid
questions,
fire,
stuff like that. But the movie definitely portrays it in a lot more of a comedic light. It's almost like a silly montage sequence, and
I kind of chuckled when I read those list of questions. I found the novel, I didn't find like laugh out loud funny, but it's quoting Brett Easton Ellis again, but he talks about how writers should have a sense of humor, and you can tell that Murakami has a sense of humor about the subject, even though he plays it straight. It's not ironic or anything.
Right.
But it is absurd in a lot of ways. And it leads up to that fucking ending part, which I love. He says, like, call police and ambulance, and Shige, who's the son, gets the ambulance, and it's like, what was she saying? Liar, liar, just that one word over and over. Shige pressed the palm of his hand to his left eye and squinted up at him. What was this all about? Ayama shook his head weakly. I don't know, he said. Nothing really.
and that's how the book ends.
And that's the end.
That's the end of the book.
I fucking died laughing when I read that. Oh man, this book, man, I haven't been this like psyched about a book in years, so I'm glad I read it.
Yeah, highly recommend it. Highly recommend.
Yeah, it's like I got it for like what, $15 at Barnes and Noble. You can read it in a day or two. It's like, if you're like looking to get back into reading, which is kind of my ulterior motive for starting this podcast, was getting back into reading.
It is best to have an ulterior motive.
Yes, as it turns out.
Yeah. It's also on Audible as well, if you're more of an audiobook kind of person. If you're on the go and you want to listen to something while you're driving somewhere, it's only like it's a 5-hour listen, I would say. That's if you're listening to it at 1.0 speed like a normal person, and not like 3 times speed like a psychopath.
Yeah, whenever I share like a 4-hour podcast, fucking Dan's like, yeah, I'm gonna listen to this at 1.5 speed. Like, why?
Why? Yeah, I guess it's the audiobook equivalent of Ben Shapiro-ifying everything. It's like Yassification, but
Shapiro-fication.
Yeah, you've just Ben Shapiro-fied this book.
We've got Yassification, Bimbofication, Sissification, and now Ben Shapiro-fication.
Exactly. To kind of talk about the ending of the book, or I guess the end of both the book and the movie. it's interesting that to kind of just get a bit meta here. It's interesting that the last time we talked about Miike, we talked about Harakiri, Death of a Samurai, and the very next Miike film we do is Audition, which both feature a sequence where a character is undergoing immense physical pain and torture.
Yeah.
But I would say that in Harakiri, it actually affected me a lot more than it did in the movie.
Yeah.
That's not a knock against Audition. After Asami kind of drugs Aoyama, she breaks into his house and is, torturing him because of this weird mental illness or whatever she has. She's got this thing about, any man that lies to her is no better than her abusive stepfather who had no feet. He had no feet, so she takes a wire saw and cuts off his foot. But in the movie, they actually added like other additional tortures that she does. That was not in the book. She takes out like
deeper.
Yeah. She takes out a bunch of acupuncture needles and starts like poking them in his abdomen, and she sticks them under his eyes as well.
Yeah.
And I remember cringing a lot harder the first time I watched the movie during that, actually. Although the sequence where she's sawing his foot off, like gleefully moving her arms up and down as she kind of pulls the two rings of the wire saw.
Yeah.
That scene was really fucked up, because they actually did a pretty cool practical effect with the foot being cut off with that. It looked really cool.
Right, yeah.
But it was nothing like the pure just you're clenching your teeth so hard you feel like you're gonna break them that I experienced with Harakiri. That was just
it was. I think I kind of said this on that episode, was that like the problem with like horror films, and this is considered like the quintessential J horror film of the 90s, is that like when you go into a horror film, you have that mindset already going. And so any violence that happens, you just kind of write off as horror. But if you see a violent like suicide scene in a samurai drama, you're like, I literally had to like stop the movie and we had to like take a break or something.
Right. And that's the thing about the book too, is because they characterize Aoyama, so excellently in the book. Even though the torture is less, there's less, things that happen to him in the book. It actually hits you a bit harder because you really feel for the character of Aoyama in the book just so much more than in the movie.
Yeah, and the way he kind of writes violence, and you hear this a lot from a lot of people that talk about writing. One of my favorite podcasts I like to listen to, Agitator. I think I've mentioned them a couple times at this point. Please listen, Agitator. Love you guys. Kelby Losek used to follow me on Twitter, but they both went completely off Twitter, and you know what, good for them. I was sad to see that follow no longer existed, but oh well, I guess I'm a loser. But what they were talking about was like the way to do like really fucked up violence in prose is you just present it, you just say it like the way you would say they ate a sandwich. You just kind of write. You don't add this like kind of get really fucked up with it, and this is super metal, bro. It's just like they were eating a sandwich, and then he put the knife into her back and pushed her down, and you just describe it like normal, and that's so much more fucked up than like he took the knife out and it glistened with reckless abandon, and he drove it in like a cock in a pussy, like whatever.
I hope I never read such a thing. That's fucking horrible.
Yeah. But even in like American Psycho, which I've only actually read half of, I need to go back to it. But like he'll like Patrick Bateman will just be talking about like some guy's wearing an Armani suit, and then he throws in like, oh, and I jacked off to the driller killer scene in Body Double. Oh, and this guy's wearing fucking Giorgio watch or whatever, and then I stepped on a dog this morning. And you just like describe it as things happen. You don't really adorn it with this like horror language or whatever. So that was kind of interesting to talk about. This might end up being a pretty short one, but is there anything else we want to talk about?
Well, I think, I guess to just kind of get pretty basic with it, the major difference between the ending of the book and the ending of the movie is that in the book, Aoyama kind of tries to flee from Asami, and he like starts crawling up the stairs, and she like pursues him up the stairs, and he like kicks her after she has already cut off one of his feet. So I assume he kicked her with the leg that wasn't a stump.
No. In the book, he specifically describes kicking her with the stump.
Oh, he does.
Because when she gets up, she's like covered in his blood from the foot.
Right.
Yeah.
He, like.
And then he has to make a tourniquet, which he doesn't do in the movie.
Yes. Yeah. In the movie, she already did it for him. She like tied a belt around both of his legs. But yeah, he kicks her down the stairs, and it doesn't quite kill her. She is injured, but she gets back up, and then Shige, his son, gets home, and she attacks Shige, and in the movie, in the book, he fucking like he had like a combat knife somewhere in the house. I guess he was just like a. There's a part in the book that they don't really go into in the movie, is that a lot of the characterization with Aoyama's relationship with his son is that he talks about how he had started watching more movies than he had ever watched his entire life in the years following his wife's death, and he learned how to play video games. Like he was really trying to, build a bond with his son. So they watched a lot of movies together and played a lot of games together. And there's a sequence where they watch all of the Rambo movies, and Shige, by the time they're at the end of the movie, he's pretty pissed off. He's like, these movies are getting dumber and dumber as they go on.
It's like me bitching about Predator 2.
And I guess he was such a fan of action movies, which they kind of emphasize in the book, but not in the movie. He has like a combat knife, and he fucking stabs her to death with the combat knife in the book. He stabs her in the neck.
Yeah. Pretty brutal kill, honestly.
It is, yeah. He stabs her in the neck, and then she dies.
Yeah, as most people do.
As most people do when you stab them in the neck, yeah.
Right.
And in the movie, when Shige gets home, she tries to spray him with like this little bottle of mace, and he's kind of like, "Who the fuck are who are you? What are you doing in my house?" And then he runs away from her up the stairs, and then instead of getting kicked down the stairs by a like half conscious Aoyama, Shige like full force kicks her in the chest as she's coming up the stairs, and she just goes flying, and she hits the back of her head on like the ceiling too. I'm pretty sure she like hits her head on the ceiling and then flies down the stairs and breaks her neck. So
and that's what kills her instead.
And yeah, that's what kills her. She just falls and breaks her neck. I thought. Yeah,
even I think the killing of the dog in the book was more effective than in the movie.
Yeah, they don't really draw much attention to the dog in the movie, but the dog is part of a lot of conversations in the book where they're talking about, taking the dog for a walk, and there's like an entire sequence where Aoyama is just like in his own head daydreaming about talking to Yamazaki Asami. And the dog, I think he describes it as he's usually pulling the dog, like, because
Yeah,
the dog is
yeah,
always distracted by things while they're going for a walk. But this time the dog is actually pulling him and like looking up at him confused, like, dude, what the hell are you doing? and and then when she kills the dog in both the movie and the book, but they don't show it in much detail in the movie, other than you see the dog is dead and like his head is twisted backwards.
yeah.
Um, which, to be fair, I don't think most people would want to watch a movie where you see a dog have its legs cut off with a wire and then it like wakes up.
Right. No, probably not.
The way it's described in the book is really horrifying, and it has an
Yeah,
emotional effect on Aoyama because he actually tries to stop her from killing the dog, uh, because he's fully accepted that he's going to be killed, that she's going to kill him because he's drugged and he can barely move. And he's
yeah,
just accepted that he's going to die, but he doesn't want her to kill the dog because then if the dog dies and he dies, then his son will really be alone, which
yeah,
is
yeah,
kind of an interesting look into his own how much he cares for his son in the book. Is that he tries to get her to stop killing the dog even though he's about to be killed himself. It's quite the sequence.
yeah. And it's the whole concept is part of this kind of like the tradition of erotic thriller is like um there was the fantastic sentence I said before, and also the just idea of the the woman taking all of whatever bad or confusing things that happened in her life and using all of that to punish this one person's like moral error or moral sin that just happened this one time, and it all coming full force on him essentially becoming this kind of scapegoat, and like you can get kind of like highfalutin about it, but it's similar in that to bring up Eli Roth again, that movie Knock Knock he made where the girls basically punish Keanu Reeves for everything that happened to them because he um, bit on their kind of ruse that they uh, play on him. It's also a remake of a pretty cool 77 movie called Death Game. And yeah, it's like how it's just like that one passage I read about him feeling like there's something that he can't take back. It's this, you get in a relationship with someone and it turns sour and you feel like you're being punished for something either you didn't do entirely or that maybe you took part in but you weren't the main problem or
Right.
whatnot. So
The kind of interesting thing about it is if you are reading the book without having any knowledge of the, because the problem was we watched the movie first, so when I was reading the book I knew what was going to happen.
yeah,
But in the as like a first time reader, uh, if you suspect that something is off, as the book hints at, you would assume she's going to do something to him because she figures out that the audition was just a setup to get a woman, which is like the one sleazy thing that the main character does, kind of
mm-hmm.
shitty thing to do. But she doesn't actually punish him for that. She never finds out that that was how he even met her, was through a just the audition was a setup to begin with. She
Yeah,
actually punishes him because he loves his son.
yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting thing that she doesn't punish him for the actual like one
I
mistake he
think
made. It's actually she punishes him for the virtue of also loving his son when she demanded that he only love her.
yeah, and
Which is
I
kind of an
think she
interesting
has
thing.
this way that she developed this bad relationship with her stepfather has made her almost like this like anti-natalist where like all like parental relationships are like suspect and
Right.
should be treated as like horrifying. Like I was just thinking about this the other day of like you remember when that picture was going around that Tom Brady took of him and his son when they were like out at the beach or something,
Right.
And like people were like implying that he was some kind of like pervert for like taking a picture with his son.
Yeah, people are so coom-brained now that like a father showing affection for his son is just like they think something is wrong. It's like
like no wonder father issues are like
so fucking
apparent prevalent in culture when a father showing basic love and affection for his son is like borderline pedophilia or whatever.
That's happened a few times where like there's like been several instances specifically with Tom Brady where people are like, "Oh, that's weird." It's just like it's just a guy who, you know, has a lot of love and appreciation for his son.
I mean Tom Brady is one of these like kind of like fucking Ayn Rand type characters where like he's just like really good at what he does and people fucking hate him for whatever reason.
He's very good at what he does, and he's a very simple I don't know much about his like personal life, but he just seems like a normal guy.
Yeah, he just seems like a normal dude that's really good at football. And
right.
I mean, I'm not really a sports guy, but
yeah, neither am I.
Yeah.
I'm sure Freddie would know if he's listening to this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I found that to be a pretty interesting aspect of it, that she kind of punishes him for the fact that he loves his son, which is a lot better. The characterization of that is a lot better in the book. Though the movie does have a pretty funny moment where the son brings a girl home, and he's like showing her stuff. He's showing her stuff in his book because
show her dinosaurs.
Yeah, in the movie, he's almost entirely focused on his love of dinosaurs and biology and stuff like that.
Yeah.
While I think that was sort of a part of his character in the book, but they kind of talk more about his, you know, watching movies with his dad and stuff like that, and they just kind of have like this very close bond. But in the movie, he really likes dinosaurs, and he brings this girl home, and they're like looking at the dinosaurs in this biology book of his, and the dad kind of has this moment where he like gives his son a wink and like an okay hand symbol, or hand sign, you know, and the son winks back, and it's a pretty good moment between the two characters, but you really do feel the bond a lot more in the book, I would say.
Yeah. There the moment when he's like showing her the dinosaurs, I was like thinking he's literally me. And because when I was a little kid, I was like obsessed with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd show them to girls, but
right.
I like dinosaurs.
I mean, it seemed to work in that one instance, so.
Yeah. And then like his dad gives him the okay sign.
Yeah.
Oh. I think the first half of the movie is really good. I think it's really funny.
Yeah, I think the first half was pretty straightforward in how it was adapting the book, and it was doing it pretty faithfully, and I really enjoyed that part. But then when you got to the part where it's like we're in the third act now, and you realize that this is the part of the book where there are 2 chapters left, and they still have like almost half of the movie's runtime left over.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's starting to feel like there's a lot of filler. It was not too dissimilar to how Ichi the Killer felt when we watched Ichi the Killer, which is another Takashi Miike movie, where by the end of the movie we were like, this is absolutely ridiculous. What the hell is going on? I'm not even having fun anymore. This is fucking retarded.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
I feel like I need to rewatch Ichi the Killer because I keep hearing people saying like it's really good, and I'm like, maybe I just wasn't in the right mood for it. I don't know.
But. Maybe I don't know. We were very confused when we watched that movie. Not to turn this into Ichi the Killer thing, but there was a point where we didn't even know who Ichi was when we were watching it. We thought it was the main the guy that's on the poster that has like the scars on his face. But then it was quickly apparent
it's not him for sure.
Yeah. That was a very strange movie, but it kind of had a similar problem that I felt that Audition had, where by the time you got to the end, there was like dream sequences and flashbacks and stuff that just didn't feel like they fit with the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it felt like they were trying to, I guess, almost like solve the wrong cinematic problem of trying to tell this story. Wherein if you just took like they say like Rosemary's Baby is almost like identical to the novel. Like you could like almost pop open the novel and watch the movie and just follow it. Like if they just did something like that, where I mean, Miike is kind of known for being almost too faithful to his source material. It's kind of one of the criticisms he gets a lot is that like he doesn't, because he's like such a prolific director and he does a lot of directing, he almost kind of doesn't really have a vision for the piece. And so it just kind of so it can sometimes come across as like this not really fully formed cinematic concept. I don't know this for sure.
That's kind of what I've heard about his film Like a Dragon, the movie adaptation of the first Yakuza game. Because,
yeah.
Like that one, it kind of condenses the actual story of what that game was and into like a single night as opposed to like a multiple day sort of ordeal.
Right.
And it kind of just feels like you're experiencing things that happened in the game with no actual connection to what the main theme of the game was. Because the game, despite being, from the early 2000s, it is a narrative that has a theme. A lot of people like to present video games as being fairly simplistic until, like, fucking The Last of Us came out, and then video games were suddenly art. Believe it or not, games also had themes back then too. And yeah, it kind of doesn't it doesn't really connect well with what that was kind of going for. So who knows?
Yeah, it's also pretty interesting because Audition was it was so popular in the kind of the rear tail end of like the independent film boom of the 90s. Obviously, Eli Roth was a big fan, and like if you talk to anyone that was like a big cinephile in the 90s, the Audition was going around everywhere, and I think that's probably what got Ichi the Killer a cult following as well. But the movie was made in 99, which is 2 years after the novel was published. The novel doesn't get translated to English until 10 years after the movie.
Yeah.
So people had only watched the movie, and then the novel was kind of an afterthought. In fact, like if you talk to like anyone, they're like, "Oh, there's a novel," and it's like, yeah, and it's arguably better. But yeah, I didn't want this to turn into a Takashi Miike hate fest because I actually really love Takashi Miike, and
yeah,
I love how much of a workman he is, and just getting shit out there and getting work done. It's kind of what I want to emulate in my career, wherever that goes. But yeah, I think that's all I really had to say on the topic, unless you had anything else we wanted to wrap up with.
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything that has to be said. I mean, it was a pretty short book, so I don't think there was too much to be said about it.
Yeah.
We currently don't actually know what the next episode is going to be. For the podcast, we're not sure yet. So
it'll definitely happen. We'll just have to figure out what we're gonna do. But yeah, we'll be back in. This will go up on Monday or Tuesday, so that'll be the 3rd or 4th. So we'll be back on the 16th or 17th. Did I do my math right there? 17th or 18th? Yeah, 17th or 18th. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. This has been Sense of Life. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. See you next time.